so short.
Okay, I'll read these. Take a look at Nancy and see if she wants us to start.
I'm not organized.
Yeah, I know, she's right there. I don't know.
Should we need a...
I think a little song.
Should we go... Yeah. Oh, are we playing? Whatever you guys want. Maybe we should sit over there.
Yeah, let's you want to stay put? Are you ready? You want one more? One more. First one.
First one. Great. How long? Oh my God. Do you want to just start from the Allegro, maybe?
I don't know. Let's do that. Okay.
afternoon. My name is Rich Caparella, and let me just say first that I'm honored beyond words that I was asked to be here today by Nancy. And like you, pretty much shocked beyond words as to why we're all here today. I did meet Guido many, many years ago, but I got to know him in any real way starting 9 years ago when he became the conductor of the Santa Monica Symphony. I mean, sure, he played with that other band downtown for 4 decades or so, but he and I shared this pride in the quality of music making in our hometown on the West Side. And you'll be hearing from a colleague from the Philharmonic a bit later, but I'll take my moment to concentrate on the 9 years with the Santa Monica Symphony. And I was the host for those concerts. And I spent countless evenings backstage at Barnum Hall at Semmel High as Guido would be gearing up to lead a performance, only to discover that he'd forgotten his dress trousers or his shoes, or his baton, or his score. I was there for all of that. I will qualify this by saying that didn't all happen at once. But that's what happens when you've got your head wrapped around, are we doing the repeat in the first movement of Beethoven instead of what the rest of us are worrying about, which is, where did I park my car? After a performance, Guido would invite many of us for pizza at the then Doubletree restaurant. It was a wrap party where you really saw why this man was so successful at what he did, because he just loved the music, and he loved people, and he loved introducing people to music. Guido's passion for music was so strong and indefatigable that he even once joined my Beatles cover band for a Santa Monica Symphony benefit performance. And what was the song that he joined us on? Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys. And what did Guido Lamell play at that performance in that backyard on a hot summer's day? That's right. He played it used to be, that was called a tannerin. People thought of it as a theremin, that woo. Yeah, he played that on the saw. I'll never forget the night he showed up for the rehearsal at my place, and he opened up the instrument case, and there inside, very nicely wrapped, was the saw. It was a 1728 Guarneri, if I recall. His affection for the audience, the orchestra, the music was infectious. Every time he climbed on that podium was a love fest. And the sounds he was able to draw from a community orchestra was mind-blowing. Many a time during a performance, I would turn to Marcia and say, listen to this. Listen to what he got out of these folks. Just amazing. The city of Santa Monica, the Los Angeles Philharmonic, Southern California, the world of music in general, is quite a lot poorer than it was just a couple of weeks ago. Like you, still coming to terms with this loss. But at least we've got all those recordings he made with the Philharmonic and the great memories of being around him with his effervescent presence. We miss you, Guido. And so we begin our remembrances, and our first speaker will be Ben Bartolomy. Ben?
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Ben Bartolomy, and I'm the husband of Brooke, and as such, the brother of Rachel and the son of Nancy and Guido. We thank you deeply for being here with us today. With Guido's passing, so many of us, if not many or all, have been at a complete loss for the words to capture, let alone understand the moment that we find ourselves in. In a flash, our community has lost a much-loved luminary, and heaven has since sparkled with a bit more brilliance. And these kinds of words are not still yet enough, and it's not for lack of trying. There are about 170,000 current words in the English language, and you know, Brooke and I read a bit, so we know about half of them, and Nancy actually knows the other half. Right now in our studies, we're right in the middle of the alphabet at, you might try to guess, the letter M, between maestro and magnanimous. And despite the usual letter order of the letters in between the spaces, you would find Guido there. I first began to grasp the extent of Guido's impact on everyone around him a few years ago as we were walking out of midnight mass on Christmas Day from St. Monica's, and someone came running up to him saying, "Maestro, maestro, thank you so much for the performance that you put on a few days ago. It was really beautiful and can't wait for the next one." And my first thought was, wow, do all of us have to start calling him that? And the second one thereafter was, man, Guido's really a sort of celebrity around these parts. You might divine that from the scope of the congregation gathered here today that that's more than enough proof. In terms of his magnanimity, we know some words. We know that Guido poured all of himself into everything that he did. One of the things that I got to directly experience and learn from him were the pogo stick. I didn't take him up on it. The electric unicycle, I was nowhere near his equal. Driving his Tesla, I had already scratched one of their cars. And playing tennis. And here I was actually starting to catch up to him, but I'll need a new training buddy. However, the most striking lesson that he taught me was at our wedding last August, where he proclaimed to Brooke in front of the small gathering that we had there that no man could ever make her as happy as she deserved to be. That her happiness had to come from within. And I, thinking I had gotten off easy, then met his gaze and was told, "And you, Ben, your job is to spend each and every day trying to make her happy." And these were words that he lived by. Guido showed up as himself in every space with every moment and built community and friendships with every opportunity. He was a consummate violinist, conductor, engineer, craftsman, teacher, friend, brother, husband, and father. His motto was, if you can play the violin, then you can do anything. And he set out to prove that every day. Today, in remembrance and in celebration of his life, we will hear so many stories and sentiments to finally capture this moment and clutch it closely to our hearts. Buzzing like lightning in a bottle, these memories, these thoughts will remain shared between us all. My small spark to contribute is this: to be his son and to hold him as my father has been and will continue to be among the greatest blessings and honors I will ever know. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. We'd next like to hear from Harvey Lamell. Harvey?
Coming from Houston, this is flood insurance. I hate funerals. Each one brings up not only the funeral, but past funerals where we've lost people, and I'm sure that's true for everyone. They say that when you set out to do something, you make a plan. I tried to make a script. Well, the first thing that goes out the window is the plan. You know, I've got words here, I've got titles, I've got subtitles, I got things. It's all beginning to look like Moby Dick. Joseph, as I talked to him early this morning, my son, gave me some good advice. He said, take a deep breath. And then he said, and remember to keep breathing. My friend Larry Wheeler also suggested that I exhale. Joseph then told me as to what I'm about to say or what I should say. Helpful? Well, good luck with that. And it brings to mind a gesture that I saw a number of times from Guido while he was in the hospital, the first time we were able to start communicating. We'd try to say something, and we'd get frustrated. And his gesture was,
Yeah.
so bear with me. I first got to know Guido about 69 years ago. And I still don't understand him fully. But in I guess 42 years since he's been here, I've been here hundreds of times, all the way from Houston. It was always a happy occasion, whether it was celebrating Christmas with family, going to a fabulous LA concert, and an even more enjoyable rehearsal, where I got to meet so many of you here. That's one of the things that's hard about this, is that each face, each familiar face, each face that has become familiar, reminds me of my brother and reminds me of what's here. The one thing that never, ever crossed my mind in coming here was that it would be to say goodbye, let alone goodbye forever. Tony and I have never lost a brother. This is really hard, and yet here we are. Guido had an easy, genuine zest for life. He never stopped being a kid. He loved gadgets. He loved crazy powered things. Anything that rolled or moved with power had to be in the garage. Now it's up to Nancy to clean all that stuff out. In fact, not long ago, as Ben mentioned, Guido bought a pogo stick. I mean, really, how many 60-plus-year-olds do you know that need a polo stick? But it was more than just any pogo stick. It was more like a high-tech, pressurized, military-grade launch system. It could kill you if you didn't know how to use it. Oh, and he figured it out. Then he had the good sense to stop using it. He was just as fearless and on stage with his music. He would and could play anything, from a violin to a viola, even to a saw. As he was recovering, when we were able to talk, I told him, Guido, don't worry about some possible impairment. If such a thing happens, you can always play the viola and no one would ever be the wiser. One other thing Guido somehow was that he somehow never seemed to age. Just look at that.
Yeah.
He was always youthful in demeanor and in appearance. But I wasn't like Guido. In many trips here, many of you got to know me as Guido's brother. That's fair. But starting with having lunch together at the Brown Derby 40 years ago, the waitress complimented me on my son. Well, that cost her the big tip that I had intended to give her. But that kept on. Every time we were together in restaurants, I would get that. They would think I'm his father. Heck, we're only 3 years apart. To think that 40 years ago I looked like I could be his father, well, that sucks. But it is what it is. I learned to live with it. He has hair, I don't. I need that. You're right. He's here also to help in case I just collapse. Thank you. Well, keep going. He was a hero to me. He looks heroic. When I saw him for the first time surrounded with tubes, wires, monitors, pumps, blankets, almost hidden, it was a shock. But as I slowly got past the initial shock, what I saw was all Guido. The prominent brow, the powerful jaw, the deep-set eyes, the lion's mane that I didn't have. Lying still before me was what I saw as a heroic figure, something Michelangelo could have crafted. I stayed a while the first time, overwhelmed and in awe of the stature and bearing lying before me. When his eyes finally opened, their beautiful blue radiated out to me once again, giving me and all of us hope and confidence he was coming back. Within just a few days, he was joking, talking, laughing, getting out of bed. Phew, he was really back. So I flew back to Houston, relieved he was on his way not only to a full recovery, but 120%. But sadly, it was not to be. Just a few days later, he left us again, not for good, forever. He gave as he was given. He was endowed with many, many gifts, talent, love, curiosity, but above all, a great heart. The big thing, again, is that he gave all that, he gave it forward with interest. He was generous in his every fiber. He shared all of his blessings freely and enthusiastically with his family, with his many friends and colleagues, with his audiences. His friends became our friends. They became friends with each other. Seeing so many of you here today fills me with gratitude and memories. I'm confident that his memory will not only not fade, but grow, and that the love and friendships that have been put in place by him will endure. He didn't come from nothing. Mom and Dad set the pattern. Nancy and Guido carried it on together. Hugely talented and dedicated, Mom and Dad were both adventurers. Generous and kind, they left everything to move to a new future in a new world in a land thousands of miles away. Their story has all the romance and drama of A Sound of Music. Coming from a titled aristocratic family with roots going back centuries, Mom met Dad, the brash and irrepressible young architect from a working family. The way Dad finally won over Mom's father, the seemingly imperious governor of his region, was with a book of fanciful illustrations depicting his future with Mom as a burgeoning family of ducks. Guy und Gar. Well, you can see where Guido came from. That's a magical story all to itself. In fact, as I look at the story of Guido and Nancy, I see parallels with Mom and Dad. Both were very different people, each hugely talented and accomplished in their own right, each with their own habits and preferences and foibles. But with boundless love for each other and the three of us, Mom and Dad accommodated each other in all things. Mom was as excited as she was frustrated by a house filled with paintings taking over everything and violin scales every morning. I have no doubt that Nancy found much to be frustrated with in the, shall we say, collateral repercussions of Guido's many projects, talents, and adventures, but they persisted together in love. I like to think I had something to do with Mom and Dad's story in emigrating to America, but heck, I was only a year and a half old at the time. What could I do? In the years after he got here, Dad filled the house with a treasure trove of paintings. Mom with wonderful singing. Together they set Guido, Tony, and me all on our way. Guido in music, Tony as a prolific architect and builder, and me, well, I carried on with Dad's hairstyle. The heritage of music in Guido's life and our family goes way back. From the beginning, music was an integral, vital part of family life. He loved the violin. While Mom and Dad were both religious in a traditional sense, as with so many other musicians, music was Guido's religion, and he practiced it fervently. It was his prayer. The concert hall and every venue he ever played in were his church. The hundreds of audiences he played for around the world, the musicians and craftsmen he worked with in building his house, and the students he inspired were his congregation. The LA Phil and the Santa Monica Symphony were his spiritual home. He was totally committed to the violin. Even though he could have retired years ago, he continued to prepare himself to audition for new openings in the first section whenever they came up. Who does that? As a conductor, Guido had one equal quality that was truly rare and special: humility. How often do you see that in any kind of leader, let alone on a podium? This was a big part of what endeared him to his orchestras and audiences. Mom and Dad spoke many languages. Guido inherited that gift. But he would never let himself be limited by not knowing a language, if that was the case. Somehow, he managed to connect fluently with everyone. He was irrepressible. He just rushed in and started talking, and people understood and responded. Somehow, regardless of language skills or whatever, he got the job done. He sent the message. I realize now that Guido's ability and eagerness to communicate may well have been his greatest skill, not only as a musician and conductor, but as a human being. That's what made it possible for all of us to come together throughout his life. Mr. Caparella talked about good vibrations. Guido himself was the soul of those. An instrument is really all about resonance. Singers feel this acutely. As my mom would say, die Resonanzen. And I tried to get there with my own vocal efforts. His very being was a soundboard that amplified everything around him. It made everything bigger, better, more beautiful. He set everything around him vibrating in sympathetic resonance. Just like other string players who dream of Strads, Guarneri's, Guaraninis, the great instruments that respond so evenly and perfectly. Guido was on the same quest to the very end. In fact, the last time I saw him in the hospital while he was getting better, he was talking about acquiring a great violin. But what he didn't realize, and what I've only just begun to realize, was that the big, great instrument he hoped for had been there all along. Right there in his heart and being. He was the great instrument he hoped to find, one of his maker's best. So what do we call him? Growing up, as you've heard me say now, he was always Guido to Tony and me, not Guido. And Guido stayed with me to this day. But Mom and Dad, of course, had it right. He was Guido. Finally, barely a month before his 69th birthday, finally, at long last, it's come into focus for me. Finally, I think I have it right, but with an important difference. He wasn't Guido. He wasn't Guido. In the same way that great violins get great names, the Lady Blunt, the Exiguity, others, this great instrument also should have a name. I'll think of him as Guido del Gesù.
Thank you, Arby. Of course, there will be music today. Pieces with special meaning for Guido and the family. All of the musicians you'll be hearing, except for Joseph Lamell and Gavin Martin, are members of the LA Philharmonic, although Gavin does play with the Philharmonic when they need 2 keyboards instead of 1. The Meditation from Jules Massenet's Thais was one of Guido's absolute favorites. It became part of family events, both sad and happy. When Nancy and Guido first got together, Guido played it at the funeral of Nancy's father. He also played it for daughter Brooke's wedding dinner more recently. And to perform it now in an arrangement not for violin but for clarinet and piano is Arpy's son, Joseph Lamell, with Joanne Pierce Martin. not making this any easier, you know. For our next remembrance, we'll be hearing from Diane Allen Craig. Diane?
I think I might have to adjust this. My name is Diane Allen Craig, and I'm a freelance classical flutist here in town. And I've had the very good fortune to work with the LA Philharmonic for many, many years. And as you can imagine, that's how I met Guido. Walking into a new playing situation is always a bit unsettling, but it'll come as no surprise to you to hear that it didn't take long for Guido to introduce himself, and we became very close friends. I'm not sure how many of you are really aware of this, but besides Guido's musical talents, he possessed a very forward-looking, shrewd business acumen. While still in his 20s, he was looking to buy his second house, and he was considering 2 different places and just couldn't decide between them. So on a lark, he asked me, I can do this, right? Or maybe not. I worked as an audio tech a while back. Okay, he asked me if I would come and see both of them. So after we'd seen the second house, I was totally in love. Not with Guido, but with the house. And I told him I'd be happy to offset his mortgage for him, and I would help him and become his housemate. So in 1987, we both moved into 2476 Cherimoya Avenue. We lived together in that house for 3 years, and then Nancy came into our lives, and they married, and they moved out. And I remained in the Cherimoya house for another 3 years until I married in 1994. Guido was an ideal housemate. He was fun and energetic, generous, and all-around great guy. We shared many experiences together, and I learned many, many things along the way that still resonate with me today. So I thought it only appropriate that I share with you the top 10 wisdoms of Guido Lamell. First, when clearing out your refrigerator, pay no attention to that use by best date on a sealed yogurt container. According to Guido, yogurt stays fresh for months beyond that date of the manufacturer. And in fact, I watched him many a time devour the yogurt that was 3 months too old, according to the manufacturer, and he suffered no ill effects. I suppose this story doesn't really speak well to how often we cleaned our refrigerator, but I know that you all have to admit that those little containers can get pushed to the back where you never look until months later. Pearl of wisdom number 2. The most important rule about entertaining is to always leave a bowl or 2 of M&Ms, peanut M&Ms, at your party. In fact, this was the only hard and fast rule that we had in that house. Every party, we had to have peanut M&Ms. Now, I was telling Nancy this the other day, and she told me that as the years went on, that they stopped doing that. And I guess as we age, we actually listen to what dietitians say more than we do when we were younger. But I have to tell you that as I looked closely at the Lamell family pictures this week, I noticed there was an open package of M&Ms, peanut M&Ms, in one of the pictures that Guido is holding out in his right hand. That picture got submitted to the video montage that you'll be able to see at the reception. So if you get a chance and you're watching it, look for the M&Ms in his hand. Pearl wisdom number 3. If you find a beehive in a forest and are thinking about shooting it down with your brand new PowerShot 3000 slingshot, don't. Even though you believe that if you're far enough away and lie still, there's no way the bees will ever go after you. This famous story actually took place in Meadowmount Music Camp, which was a camp for string players that was known as an intensive summer workshop. I mean, kids had to practice 4 hours in the morning and another couple hours in the afternoon. Despite that, I wasn't surprised to learn from Guido that he and his pals had time to go out into the forest and had discovered this beehive. So on a dare, Guido was positive that this would work, and so he hid behind a log, took his slingshot, hit it bullseye, and the bees came out. He stood very still, crouched behind there, and all of a sudden, bees started to come and land on his arm, and then there were more and more, and he totally freaked out. So he went running up, got it, the whole swarm of bees went after him. He got stung so many times that a counselor had to take him down the hill to the hospital to be treated. Needless to say, I don't think they asked him back to Meadowmount the following year. Number 4. If you want to see the true splendor of the Rose Parade without the hassle of having to camp overnight on a cold, uncomfortable sidewalk, or even sit for 3 hours while you're waiting for the parade, all you need to do is wake up early, drive to Pasadena, and walk up and down the street where the floats are actually parked, nose to nose, and you can get it all done in a half an hour's time. You see the floats in their pristine condition, and you don't have to sit on the sidewalk listening to all those marching band drum corps, which is a big plus considering how often we were drinking late into the night at New Year's Eve celebrations. Number 5, when freezing leftovers, put everything in a Ziploc bag, close it from both ends, like this, until there's just a small opening. Then you put your mouth over it, you suck all the air out, and then quickly seal it. And then you have your own vacuum-packed bag. Just a side note, if you go to Costco, you can buy a real one for $79 these days, but in the old days, this is what we did. Number 6. Don't eat a big lunch before going on the twisted Colossus roller coaster at Magic Mountain. I'll move on to number 7 because I don't think that takes any explanation. Number 7. If you're thinking about building an 11-foot boat from a design by Popular Mechanics magazine, it's best not to use water-soluble Elmer's glue as your sealant. If you do, you're likely to find yourself in the middle of a lake, furiously rowing back to the shore, hoping to find dry land before you and the boat go completely under. If you want the details of that story, you must talk to Arpi. It was Arpi and Guido who put that together, and it's quite detailed. I have left out so much, but you get the idea. At the reception, you can regale him. He'll tell you all about it. All right, number 8. You can make anyone believe that you're a very accomplished pianist if you just spend one semester of college sitting in a practice room, ignoring the violin, and at the piano keyboard, painstakingly learning Chopin's Opus 25, Etude number 12, better known as the Ocean Etude. Guido was a freshman at University of Michigan. He was an accomplished violinist who was already the concertmaster, but he had to take what we called a piano placement exam. And if you're good enough, you never have to take that piano class. If you're not, you have to take the remedial piano class. Guido had to take the remedial piano class. So he was in the class, but he was so frustrated. He hated the music. You know, it was Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Mary Had a Little Lamb, and then maybe you'd graduate to a Clementi Sonatina. When all of his piano friends were playing these amazing, amazing pieces. So he just took it upon himself to learn this etude, which is unbelievably complicated. And he learned it sitting at the piano, figuring out the fingerings one by one. He spent hours and hours doing it the entire semester. When it came time for the final exam, what musicians called the jury, the panel asked Guido to play the Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Mary Had a Little Lamb, and he was miserably failing. And the whole panel was like, Guido, you're the concertmaster of this orchestra. Did you not practice piano at all this semester? And he very sheepishly said, I actually practiced the piano more than I played the violin, So they were shocked and they said, all right, just sit down and play for us what you practiced. And he sat down and blew them away with this piece that like this. And for the rest of his life, he could do this. And it was kind of like a parlor trick. Like, as a musician, people are always asking, oh, do you play any other instruments? And you say, oh, well, I play the piano a little. And he could sit down and do like this kind of thing. And then he said, oh, I don't want to bore you, and get up after just a few measures. It was all right. Number 9, when building a house, don't bother to get a licensed contractor who only shows up to check your job sites once a day. You can do it yourself. Guido really was an amazing do-it-yourselfer. And what he didn't know how to do, he just researched and he learned. And this was before YouTube videos made it easy. He was his own contractor on the Lamell Santa Monica house, where if the building code said add 1 2x4, he added 2 or 3. And that house is probably the strongest house in all of Santa Monica. And if you happen to be in the area when the next big earthquake rattles the Southland, run as fast as you can to their house. It's probably the safest place to be. Number 10, lastly, Guido taught us all through his own example of how to live life to the fullest. His smile and optimistic demeanor captivated and drew others to him. I can't remember in all the years that I've known him that he ever raised his voice to demean or disparage anyone. And that's not to say there weren't tough times, but even when things weren't going as he had hoped, he always managed to believe in himself and the people around him, and he had the confidence to know that things would work out one way or the other. The last time I saw Guido was at the hospital on Monday. I sat down and chatted him for 30 minutes, overstaying my welcome a lot. Sorry, Nancy. She had to go out in the hallway. Knowing that he had been through this horrific ordeal, I was curious to know if there was anything that he now wanted to put on his bucket list, something that he hadn't done, something he needed to do. And his answer astonished me, actually, but in retrospect, it brings a little bit of comfort to me. He said that what he wanted to do was to play a couple more years with the Philharmonic and then really concentrate on conducting. In other words, he didn't feel the need to change anything. He was living the life that he wanted, felt fulfilled by it all, and had no regrets or burning desire to change a thing. He was a very lucky man. He was so much fun, full of energy, always up for an adventure, an amazing husband and father, and someone you could always count on. I'll miss him so much, and I will always keep him in my heart. So the next time you throw a party, be sure to put out a bowl of peanut M&Ms and raise a glass to Guido. By the way, we brought peanut M&Ms in packages for the reception, so thank you.
Strong arm, Diane. By the way, Diane, when we finish here and we head to the reception, there is an expired bowl of yogurt sitting in the sun with your name on it, just so you know. Our next speaker is a longtime colleague of Guido's in the LA Philharmonic, Danny Rothmuller. Danny.
Hi, I'll try to be brief, which I'm not known for. The first thought that came to me when Nancy so graciously asked me to say a couple of words was that Guido was the personification of that famous book, of the power of positive thinking. This person was somebody who never seemed to see the negative side of anything. And I remember meeting him the first time when he came to play with the Philharmonic. He was really casting about, trying to, learn everybody's name, and he was always very gregarious, as you all know. And, and I realized that a ray of sunshine had descended onto the stage because he was always smiling, no matter how terrible the conductor was. And he was a very happy man. And I'm looking at that picture of him playing the violin at, 6 years old? He was smiling then. He was a happy human being. And he endeavored to make everybody around him happy. Now, the power of positive thinking brought him, as you have heard, all these unbelievable projects and endeavors, which he successfully was able to accomplish. And as a personal note, he engaged in playing chamber music quite a bit, and I was asked by him to play with him, and I said, well, okay, I'll play with it, anybody who really wants to take it seriously, and he did. And I remember preparing, we did both the Debussy and Ravel string quartets. Now, for any string players out there, you know what I'm talking about here. It's no easy task. And we performed it in this downtown high-rise office building for a bunch of lawyers, I think. And there sitting in the front row was Esa-Pekka Salonen. And that's not the first time this has happened to me with him. Anyway, it was quite extraordinary. I just want to mention, since I'm trying to keep this short, which is very difficult for me, nothing is impossible. And Guido's home in Santa Monica, or I should say Guido and Nancy's home in Santa Monica, was this center of musical activity about once every couple of months. And people would bring food, and players would bring their instruments. And but a couple of times there were some pretty extraordinary events that took place there. And one was, I remember the Berlin Philharmonic was in town, and Simon came, Simon Rattle, excuse me, Sir Simon Rattle, and he actually sat down to the piano and played some chamber music with us. He's an excellent pianist, chamber music partner. And the string players all stood around with, I think there were 3 or 4 cellists sitting around, and we played the Mendelssohn Octet with the Berlin Philharmonic string section. And there was another guest violinist. What was his name? I know, Dudamel or somebody like that. Anyway, and he was, for those of you who've never heard Maestro Gustavo Dudamel play, I had the pleasure of hearing him play in some chamber music, and I played some chamber music with him at Guido's. And I have to say, he was a super class act on the violin. I couldn't believe, I was astounded, as I was astounded at how well Simon could play the piano. And we had people like Manny Axe there, and et cetera, et cetera. So I'll conclude by saying that, as all of us, I'm sure, share, we will have nothing but wonderful and cherished happy memories of this remarkable human being. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. And Danny's perfectly set up what happens next because, as Danny mentioned, Guido loved his chamber music. And our final musical tribute will feature Lyndon Johnson Taylor, Johnny Lee violins, Michael Arco violist, Robert Demain cellist, and pianist Gavin Martin. And they are going to play the opening movement of Antonin Dvorak's towering Piano Quintet No. 2, which was one of Guido's all-time favorite pieces of chamber music. And before the time of COVID-19, the Lamells, as Danny alluded to, would have frequent chamber music performances and parties at their Sunset Park home. And whenever there were the necessary musicians, say 2 violins, 1 viola, 1 cello, whenever that happened, Guido would say, let's do the Dvorak. They're all here, Guido. I hope you're happy. Here's the opening movement of the Dvorak. goes counter. We want to applaud. Our final speaker this afternoon is Dr. Robert Hamilton, who, I'll just say this, his backyard is very accommodating for Beatle cover bands. Dr. Bob?
So I feel a little bit, it's hard to follow that, put it that way. So thank you, Rich, for that introduction, and good afternoon, friends. My name is Bob Hamilton. I'm a pediatrician in Santa Monica, and also I serve on the board of directors of the Santa Monica Symphony. Unlike many of you in this room who first met Guido as a musician, my introduction to him was as his children's pediatrician. That started 27 years ago when his daughter Brooke was born. Guido was a young, excited, and happy father. Shortly thereafter, a second daughter, Rachel, was born. Again, he was totally delighted. Ladies, I want you to know that your father, Guido, was so proud to be your daddy. As a family man, Guido first demonstrated an unwavering respect, kindness, and love for his wife, Nancy. And as a father to his two daughters, Guido was all in. Like everything he did, he jumped into fatherhood with that Hungarian gusto that characterized his life. He adored his daughters and was intimately involved in everything they did. Certainly their medical care, because I saw him many, many times in my office. And as his girls aged and went on to college, he also took great pride in their accomplishments, which, ladies, are many. I also remember Guido as one of those individuals who engaged me from the minute I met him. Now, mind you, I was meeting him de novo. All of the things that you guys know and knew about Guido, I was just meeting. This guy was walking into my office, and I had no idea who he really was other than the father of Brooke and Rachel. So he was one of those guys who kind of grabbed my attention, and it was incredible. When he would come into the office visit, we would start with one of his daughters for a medical visit. Of course, we started talking about whatever was on his mind until Nancy kindly and gently nudged both of us and said, "Remember why we're here today, Dr. Hamilton." And ultimately, we did find other opportunities and other venues to deepen our friendship. I found myself totally and completely astounded by the scope of his interest. Not only did he masterfully play the violin with the LA Philharmonic for 42 years, he was multifaceted and multi-talented. I remember him as an effervescent visionary who was filled with eternal optimism and fun. He was a guy who not only designed his home, but also built it, as has been alluded to, with his own two hands. Who does that? And of course, with the intention of being able to host chamber music concerts in his own home. As a friend to all, he, along with his wife Nancy, became the recurring host of the best ever bohemian musical salons anywhere in this country. I went to many of them, and many of you who are in this room remember those moments very, very fondly. He was also the guy who would make rounds during Hollywood Bowl intermissions, enthusiastically visiting his friends in their boxes, and in the process, always managing to get a small glass of wine at each stop. Those very short but wonderful Guido moments were some of the sweetest memories my wife Leslie and I have of the Bowl. For us, the Bowl will never quite be the same. Through the years, I realized that he was also a great patriot. He loved America, the hope of America, and the American dream. Guido, in many ways, lived that dream. When the LA Phil played the national anthem at the beginning of each Bowl concert, not only did Guido play his violin, he also happily sang loudly and boisterously along with the anthem. Remember that? I do. I also learned that he was an accomplished conductor. When he was asked to take the baton for the Santa Monica Symphony in 2012, he brought to the orchestra his endless creativity and his zest for excellence. He also brought his endearing personality. Those who attended Santa Monica Symphony concerts know that seeing and hearing from Maestro Lamell was one of the highlights of the program. So this man who was so full of life and fun has now left us. Like all of you here, when Guido's brother Arpi called me to tell me the news of his passing, I was completely shocked and devastated. This vibrant man who challenged himself every day of his life to get better had departed. King Solomon wrote in the book of Proverbs that the path of the righteous is like the first dawn of day, which shines ever brighter until the full light of day. Friends, Guido left us in that full light of his life. His final week after he had recovered from his first heart attack was a gift to Guido. When he woke up from his doctor-induced sedation and could talk, he spent that week bathing in the love of family and friends. My final conversation with Guido, which occurred only a short week ago, was like no other I'd ever had with him. We spoke for a full hour, and Guido was as animated and alive as anybody in this room today. During that conversation, he shared with me how happy he was to be alive, how thankful that he had survived. He reflected on how grateful he was for a wonderful life filled with family and friends who truly loved him. And he shared many of his plans for the future. He also shared with me one last point that I will never forget. Before I left, he said, "Bob, life is short." Before I left his room, I grasped his hands, and together we prayed. I prayed for him and asked the Lord's blessing on his life. That was to be the final conversation I would ever have with him. So today, like all of you, I mourn our dear friend Guido, and I pray for the Lamell family for God's comfort and peace. But before I finish, I have one final thought to share. As we mourn for Guido, my hunch is that he has already joined that celestial band. He's probably glad-handing and kibitzing with the likes of Vivaldi, Brahms, Haydn, Dvorak, Beethoven, and of course Bach. Forever young, forever handsome, in his tux and bow tie, he's playing and probably singing along beautifully heavenly music on some kind of instrument or another, and knowing Guido is probably one of those 1728 Granaries. He would have taken off the sheath, by the way. We love you, Guido, and we always will. Thank you.
And with those words from the good doctor, we conclude this remembrance of Guido Marcus Lamell. But please remain seated a moment longer. The reception will start in a moment in the Disciple Center, which you will find by walking out the same door you walked in. It's right across that plaza. When we get there, skip the yogurt. The church has asked us to vacate the center and the adjacent patio area before 3:30, so they can prepare the spaces for the evening service and decontaminate where the yogurt was. So please respect that. Once again, that schedule, we're supposed to be gone by 3:30. And now, if you would, please remain seated just a minute longer so that Guido's family can make their way to the exit. And in the meantime, I'd like to thank you for being here and being part of today's service for Guido Lamell. Is it all right if we wait for you to leave, or do you want everybody else to pile out all at once? Sure. Thank you, folks.